Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us for this edition of Leak Project. I am your host, Rex Bear, and we have a fascinating guest with us tonight, Graham Nicholls, a lecturer, author, guru, and director of the Out-of-Body and Near-Death Experience Society. He had his first OBE, out-of-body experience, in 1987. Since that time, he has combined cutting-edge technologies and in-depth research to further develop his abilities. In 2011, he published Avenues of the Human Spirit, a moving account of his personal journey and exploration of the nature of consciousness. His second book, Navigating the Out-of-Body Experience, offers a totally new way to learn and approach the subject of OBEs. And the extended mind. He is also a co-author of Consciousness Beyond the Body, a scientifically focused exploration of the theories and evidence for OBEs, and that was published this year. Graham Nicholls has had some of the best documented out-of-body experiences with verification of anyone in the world. That's according to David Watkinson of allreality.com. Soul and Spirit magazine says, one of the leading authorities in the world on astral projection or out-of-body experiences. Graham's main focus now is teaching the Navigator Course, research, and technology towards OBEs. You can check out his work and learn more about out-of-body experiences at navigatorcourse.com and grahamnicholls, with 2 L's.com. Graham, it's a pleasure to have you on the show tonight with us. How's it going?
It's a pleasure to be here. It's going really well, thank you.
Well, it certainly is an honor to have you on the show. I know we talked a little bit before we got started, and I'm just amazed with the abilities of the mind. I told you one of my personal experiences I had with an out-of-body experience before I even knew much about it. If you would, please tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and what kind of dove you into this subject of OBEs.
Well, I guess much like the situation you described with yourself as having initially some spontaneous experiences, that's how it started for me as well. It really started with other areas than the out-of-body experience. It started with visionary experiences when I was very young, seeing an apparition at the age of around 5 years old. And then generally memories, maybe things that you could maybe put down to something like reincarnation memories. Very hard to say exactly what they were, but I had these very interesting perceptions that came through to me in my early childhood. And then at the age of around 12, I started to have a few fleeting out-of-body experiences. They lasted only a few seconds, and they really showed me that there was such a thing as the out-of-body experience. And a few months later, or not exactly sure of the time frame, I came across the concept of astral projection and out-of-body experiences, and I managed to get hold of a book. It was the only book that they had in the local bookshop, and it described the idea of out-of-body experiences in a scientific context. So I read all of that, got very excited and inspired that maybe I could learn to induce this and maybe gain some greater control over the experience. So I spent the next few months devoting myself completely, practicing every single night. It took me 6 months before I had my first induced out-of-body experience, but I basically felt this huge surge of energy, like I'd been hit by a lightning bolt, but there was nothing painful about it. It was just a very, very intense energy. And then the next thing I knew, when the energy kind of dissipated, I was looking down at myself from above, and I could see the whole room, and it seemed to be lit with a kind of bluish green energy that seemed to be radiating from my body, from my sort of energy body or whatever it was that I was experiencing. I looked at my physical body, which appeared to be grayed out, almost like I was looking at a photograph. It felt very much like if you look at a photograph of yourself, you recognize yourself, you know that it's you, but at the same time you feel no emotion because you know that it's not you. It's just an image, it's just a representation. And that's very much how I felt looking at my physical body during that first experience. And then I couldn't really move very much. I could just rotate, almost like there was a pole running through my body, and I was in this kind of horizontal position, and I could just rotate. And then that lasted for maybe a minute or so, and then I came back to my body. But really, that was the beginning of everything. It was like I'd uh, gone through a threshold at that point, and I knew then that I could induce the experience, and maybe this was the beginning of something, and it really was for the next, well, for my life since then. It's been full of various different kinds of experiences along those lines.
Now, how often did you start making yourself have these OBEs after that first experience that you realized you could do it?
Well, I think as is the case with out of body experiences, it's not so much that you make yourself have them. I tend to really dislike the term having OBEs at will, for example, because I think it's a complete misconception. I think what's going on in actual fact is more like you create the context, you create the right environment, the right context for it to take place. And so I started to work on that more and more, and I started to realize that if I got everything right in terms of the depth of relaxation, the temperature in the room, the things that I'd eaten, all of those kinds of things seemed to have an effect, as well as what I'd been doing in terms of what I'd been focusing on with my mind. All of those kinds of areas seemed to have an impact on it. So I started to tune myself, if you like, more and more to have the experiences. And then I would know when it was the right time. I could sense that my energy was at the right kind of heightened state. And then I would focus my mind more. If I had the vibrational state, which is a common state people describe prior to the out of body experience, if I experienced something like that, a kind of electrical energy kind of feeling, I would focus my mind and go into the out of body experience in that way. So I guess in terms of frequency, it was quite a lot at that point. I think maybe two or three times a week at that time, because I was totally focused on it. It was my whole life for that period for sure.
And did you start writing stuff down, your experiences?
Yeah, I started keeping a diary in 1990, and I have a diary from 1990 to now of my experiences. So yeah, I've got quite an extensive diary, which is really great for my own research and for going back and cross-referencing things, seeing how I've developed, and also discovering new things. Because as time goes on and you learn about new things, you can go back and look at the diaries and realize that, oh, okay, there was something going on there that you didn't even realize at the time. So, keeping a diary is a very, very important thing.
Now, when you have your out of body experiences, do you notice a silver cord connected to you everywhere you go?
No, never. It's a bit of a myth, really. Very few people experience a silver cord. It's in the region of between 2 and 4% of people in studies ever experience anything like that. I think really it's just a leftover from. It's either a psychological construct, I would guess, or it's some kind of suggestion that's come from the literature that people have heard about somehow and then have experienced in their experience as a result. So I don't put much weight on that, because the science just doesn't support it. There's not, like I say, it's only like 2 to 4% depending on the study. In my recent study, there was no one at all who saw a silver cord, and in the most recent study by another researcher, I think he didn't find any instances of the silver cord either. So I think it's a bit of a myth, really.
Have you heard the myth also that if you pull somebody's cord or cut the cord when you're in the astral realms, then it would actually cause you to die physically?
Yeah, I think that probably derives from medieval witchcraft and some ideas like that. That one's definitely a myth. One of my first teachers, a guy called Douglas Baker, who I worked with when I was 15 years old, he gave me my first Saturday job, basically. I started working with him, putting out books, selling books, helping him set up his lectures, etc. Um, and he used to say that the silver cord was a myth, and he used to say if anyone in the room sees it, just tear it up was his advice. He would just tell people to kind of destroy it because he would say it's just your fears or imagination being projected outwardly. I don't know if that's the case or not. Like I say, I've never actually seen one, so I've never needed to take his advice, etc. Um, but I know that he claimed that he did do that, that he kind of tore his up when he saw it once. Um,
Yeah.
and he didn't die. So there we go.
Shatter the dogma. Okay. I like
Yeah.
that. Also the out of body experiences that some people talk about are different than others. And the astral projection realms, different dimensions and stuff like that. From what I've read, that's the difference. Could you explain to us the difference between an OBE and actually astral projecting?
Well, I think astral projection is more just the occult esoteric term. It maybe focuses more on some of the practices that maybe wouldn't in contemporary literature be considered astral projection. If we go back to the Golden Dawn, Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, for example, they talked about things like traveling in the spirit vision, which was a form of scrying, or working with tattva symbols, which were elemental symbols from the from Hinduism, and they used to use these as a form of astral projection or scrying or visionary experiences. So I think in those days it was seen more as a way to access the tree of life in Kabbalah, or to access deeper parts of your own consciousness, maybe your higher self. There were writings like from Theosophy, A. E. Powell, for example, who wrote the etheric body, the astral body, causal body, etc. He wrote all those kinds of ideas that were prevalent in Theosophy. So I think a lot of that also had an influence. So yeah, I think that the main difference is really at a certain point there was a move towards maybe taking a more scientific outlook, and an out of body experience is more of a description of what the experience feels like rather than trying to um, interpret it. Because obviously, if you use a word like astral, which comes from star, like a star, so it's like you're projecting, you're going into a state like a star, a celestial kind of experience. So that's really interpreting it to some degree, and also it implies to some degree the existence of an astral body, which again is something that we haven't really established. Some people believe that, some people believe we're dealing more with an extended consciousness. So there's different interpretations now, and I think the the general consensus is moving away from ideas like astral bodies and silver cords and all of that kind of stuff, and moving more towards a more scientific framework, drawing upon quantum physics and different areas like that. So I think that's the main difference. It's more that astral projection is generally the term that you use if you're approaching things more in the esoteric realm, which can be completely valid as a way to focus on self-development and those kinds of things, or to explore the existence of whether there are these other levels. Obviously, the problem with when you experience another level like that, it's very subjective. It's very hard to know if it does have any objectivity to it, or whether it's a purely subjective thing. So it's more complicated when you start to focus on those kinds of levels, because you will find inconsistencies and contradictions. It's like religion, really. There's thousands and thousands of religions, and they're all right, of course.
Right.
But
My God's better than your God.
exactly, and I think really within these kinds of areas, you get a similar kind of thing on a more microcosmic level. You get these kind of smaller ideologies and different sort of esoteric frameworks. So I think I've tried to step outside of that. I spent many years studying these kinds of areas and found really that in many ways they held me back, because if you go into the experience with the preconception of having various bodies, some people say three bodies, some people say seven, some people say five, some people, it goes on and on and on. if you go in with those kinds of preconceptions, then it will color your experience to some degree and quite possibly limit you, especially if you have fears related to those kinds of things. Um, like if you did, for example, believe that if your silver cord got broken, you're going to die, obviously that's going to add in a degree of fear that is not necessary. If that thing doesn't even exist, then you're getting scared for no good reason. So it's kind of unfortunate in many ways that these kinds of beliefs continue to go around.
Well, I remember when I had my first experience and I was just going to sleep as it happened, and it scared me so bad that I woke myself back up. And then I started to do it again. I left my body again and started floating around. It freaked me out, so woke myself up again. Because at that time in my life, it was the religious dogma and paradigms that had my mind blocked because I was raised
Mm.
Christian. And, a lot of people that are Christian and beliefs, if you study the occult or mysticism or have abilities to tap into your mind and do things that normal people can't do, well, that's evil. And I wondered when I was floating out of my body if something else might enter my body. So it did scare me, and
Mm.
that's one of the things I was going to talk to you about. Since that time, I have expanded my mind tremendously, and I've gotten into research on OBEs and different forms of mental expansion, hermetics and stuff like that. So to me now, I look at it more as just a mental exercise, not magic or sci-fi or woo-woo. It's just literally creating the ability to do these things over practice and time, such as riding your bicycle up a very steep mountainside in the Swiss Alps. So,
Sure.
with that said, do you get a lot of people that you help along the way and they start to have these experiences and it just freaks them out to where it kind of takes them back a few steps?
Well, I guess I try to address that right from the beginning, because I'm aware that people might have fears and things like that. So one of the first stages, in a way, for me, if you're going to build a solid foundation from which someone can learn to effectively have these kinds of experiences, if you start teaching them methodologies and approaches without addressing underlying subconscious, unconscious fears, then you're kind of building on a shaky foundation essentially. So I try to address that right from the beginning and try to get people to approach it with an open mind. I like the Buddhist concept of Soshen, which is basically the beginner's mind, they call it, which is approaching everything as if you've encountered it for the first time. Now, of course, if any of these things like the chord and all of that kind of stuff, if it is true, then you'll find it anyway. So there's no need to believe in it beforehand. But if it's not true and you believe it beforehand, then you might color or influence your experiences. So, the best thing to do in my eyes is just to have an open mind, approach it with a completely blank slate. Try not to sort of get too caught up in all those different ideas because as we've just illustrated, there's so many different viewpoints that I think the best thing to do is to get down to the science, or at least the scientific method, which at the end of the day just means that you test things for how true they are. That's all science is at the end of the day. It's not an ideology or a belief system, or it shouldn't be anyway. What it really is, what the scientific method really is just approaching things to test them for their truthfulness. And I think if we take that kind of approach with our own practice and our own exploration, then we can bypass a lot of these kinds of issues. But I guess in a practical level, I'll introduce ideas from hypnosis, neurolinguistic programming, things like that to try and address people's fears, um, introduce them to more positive resources that show that these experiences are healing, life affirming, transformative, all those kinds of things, so that people really understand that there's nothing to worry about, essentially.
Right. So, and how many people would you say you've helped?
I couldn't put a number on it. I've been working, like I said, I mean, my first Saturday job was working with a lecturer on astral projection when I was 15 years old. So I'm now 40. So,
Great. So now also with this course that you do, the Navigator course, could you walk us through that a little bit?
okay, well, the course is essentially, it came a lot from the realization that you can't really effectively teach people to do things in the space of a workshop or a few days. You need to really work with people over a period of time and develop their abilities and kind of take them stage by stage through the process. Because, for example, even addressing the fear, like you just mentioned, um, can take a period of time just to get people to that point. So I I designed the course to go through each of the stages that people need. It's very practically focused, but I also introduce some of the research and the science so people can see that the ideas and the techniques that I'm talking about are all scientifically based. They're all based from things that we've actually seen and things that can actually be shown to work. So I take them through the kind of background. I take them through immersive technology, which is another area that I work in. So using virtual reality, using immersive structures, which are large environments or physical structures that you put the person inside, and then it helps to induce an experience. Using sensory deprivation, things like that, to help to get beyond the senses and go into a deeper kind of experience. So I go through all of those kinds of methods that I've worked with and developed. I go through my G technique, which is a physically based technique that I've used for, well, at least since the mid 90s in order to help induce my experiences. So that's another area that I go through, which is a kind of different approach to the OBE. And then another thing that I really focus on within that course is creating a profile. I don't believe in a one size fits all approach to this kind of work. Everyone's different, and some people have skills that are more based in, say, they're more visual, they're very good at imagining things and visualizing things, which is more the classic way of inducing this kind of thing. But someone else will be very good at lucid dreaming, so maybe that will be more suitable for them to work from. Then there's other people who are maybe they are more physical, and so the G technique or some kind of approach that works with physicality is more suited to them. So I try to find the best, most suited approach to the person rather than trying to fit the person to a particular technique that might not be suitable for them. So it basically takes you through the whole thing um, with lectures every week, Q&A every week, exercises to follow, a goal set after each week within the program, and then the final week is a completely interactive discussion where everyone can ask me any of the questions they want to cover and all of those kinds of things. Anything that they got stuck on or something they want to improve on or how can they go further, all these kinds of things. So we do all that in the final week. And then they also get a range of bonus dialogues, which is me discussing these kinds of things with experts in related areas like near-death experiences or lucid dreaming or psychical research, those kinds of things. So I bring it all together, really.
Well, that's another thing I was going to ask you, the difference between an OBE and lucid dreaming.
In my view, there's no relationship, really. I know that most people will sort of disagree with that, but I think, well, what I should say actually, I should step back. I should say, in my experiences, I don't think they're related, but I think that there are different types of what we call an out of body experience. It seems to me that some people are having lucid dreams and they believe them to be out of body experiences. What they would define as a lucid dream, sorry, as an out of body experience, I would probably define as a lucid dream. So there's a difference of definition to some degree going on there. Then we also have things like sleep paralysis, where people wake up and they can't move. They're paralyzed in the bed, but they're still able to see and classic forms of that will be that they'll see a crone or an old man will come and sit on the chest and things like that. It's very, very
Why do
terrifying.
you think that is?
I have no real idea what the root behind that is. I could just speculate, but it's a very fascinating phenomenon. But at the same time, I think I tend to lean towards that it's an illusory experience, and I think that the out of body experiences that happen in that kind of context tend to be more illusory. I think they tend to be more of a hallucinatory type experience or an extension of a dream type framework. So I tend to avoid sleep paralysis in my work. I should make the point that my out of body experiences are from a completely waking state. I don't induce them from sleep or dreams. I'm not asleep when they happen. Um, so I even in my teaching, I tend to get people to avoid inducing sleep paralysis. There are some methods out there where they encourage people to induce sleep paralysis, but I think if you do that, you're highly likely to have a scary experience because of the nature of being paralyzed and conscious at the same time. So I don't really think that's a healthy or particularly positive way to learn to have the experience. So I tend to avoid that.
Now, we talked a little bit before the show also. I purchased a book several years ago by Robert Bruce called The 90-Day Guide to Astral Projection and Out-of-Body Experiences. And he gives a step-by-step guide that takes 90 days, basically. So I did find it fascinating because when I went through these exercises, the more focus I did with them, it certainly worked. But you have a more of a scientific approach to this phenomenon. The reason I'm bringing up these exercises is I want to find out if they're applicable also a little bit towards what you do. He discusses like ways to meditate and close your eyes basically and focus on the kind of a light body. And I know you say there isn't one, but maybe this is just a form of thought
Well, I don't.
process.
No, I wouldn't. I don't say there isn't anything. I'm
Okay.
my attitude is that we don't know, and we have to explore and do the research and find out. I think that it's unlikely at this point. But
Okay.
in my book, I discuss both theories of an extended mind or of the idea of a light body, and I explore the evidence for both concepts. And it's just to me the weight of evidence at the moment is leaning more towards the consciousness-based model. But
Like
I don't
consciousness is
dismiss.
everywhere, basically.
Well, something along those lines, yeah. It could the actual mechanism and framework by which it works is obviously something we don't know yet. But I think that the implication of the experience, for example, that the body, even if we look at that statistically, only about 50% of people actually experience a body. So that's interesting in itself. If you just go by the esoteric literature, you just assume that there's a body. But if you actually look at what people really experience, rather than just taking traditions word for it, essentially, we find that only about 50% in their initial experiences have a body. And then what you find is the longer they're having the experiences, if they start to develop them consistently, then the body becomes less and less apparent, which is exactly what happened with me. In my early experiences, I had a strong sense of a body. As time's gone on, the body virtually never shows up now. Virtually all my experiences are of either a traveling awareness or some kind of spherical form, something like a sphere, which again is consistent with a lot of the research. So I think that it's very useful to just get into the research and see what people are actually experiencing.
Right. And I really appreciate your approach of a more scientific aspect. That's wonderful, especially for the skeptics and people that want to get to the real core of the matter instead of just some of the more metaphysical aspects, which both have their own merit, in my opinion.
Well, there's hundreds and hundreds of approaches. I guess the approach I take is to try and teach people the underlying mechanisms behind the techniques. If you understand the mechanisms, if you understand what that approach is trying to achieve, or what a visualization approach is trying to achieve, or whatever it might be. If you understand the fundamental principles, then you can create your own technique, or you can use any of the techniques that are out there. It's more that once you have that understanding, you can kind of work with it. You can have more of a toolbox of approaches that you then draw upon in a more creative way. It's a bit like, I guess it would be a little bit like if you were studying martial arts. For a long time we had this whole idea of, right, you're going to learn a traditional form, let's say Wing Chun or karate or, jiu-jitsu or whatever it might be. And then there was a certain point where uh, certain people came along and said, well, actually, I think there's elements from different systems that if we mix them up, we'll get a far better approach, because we'll take the best that's from each of those approaches and we'll try to understand the essential mechanisms behind the approaches, and then we'll create something even more effective. And I think really what my approach is to do that within the context of the outer body experience, to say, okay, these kinds of ideas are interesting and work. And I haven't thrown the baby out with the bathwater. There are a lot of concepts from esoteric ideas, occult ideas, that do make total sense. And I think a lot of what Robert Bruce is saying on a practical level is probably great. I've only read one of his books, but so I haven't read the one you're referring to. But I think the thing is to get down into the understanding, and the more we understand, the better, really. So in my book, I've spent a lot of time explaining the mechanisms and how different techniques relate to different types of people, and then I give the methods at the back, and hopefully by that point, you'll understand the structures and the process that you need, the steps that build up any technique. They all work on basically 4 or 5 steps. They're all consistent. You'll find the same kinds of things within any approach that you might take.
Now, that's great. Also, you talk about some evidence that you give people that go through these courses that can verify these encounters and experiences as actual out-of-body type experiences. Could you talk to us a little bit about that?
Well, I guess I'm one of the few people who is interested in evidence for the experience from from an objective point of view within this world. So, if people are interested, on my YouTube channel, there's a few videos. For example, one of a precognitive experience I had, which I think is probably one of the most amazing experiences I've ever had, and I've not seen anything like it on record, because I had the out of body experience with 4 other people in the room with me when the experience happened. I had an OBE, went to a part of London basically 4 days in the future, is what it apparently seemed to be. And I saw an explosion burst out from the right hand side of the street. I saw the chaos ensue. I felt this emotional impact hit me in the chest. I went into a kind of void like state, and one of the other people there had to kind of bring me out of the trance state that I was in, bring me round. And then I described that I'd seen this bombing. I described the street, that it was in Old Compton Street in central London, that I'd seen it from the vantage point of the corner of Moore Street. I described the whole scenario. We recorded all of this, wrote everything down within 2 hours of the out of body experience, and then 5 days later there was an explosion on that exact street, exactly where I said, with exactly as I'd seen in the out of body experience. So, that's a witnessed experience. And in the video on YouTube, there's one of the witnesses on the video describing his version of how he remembers it, etc. And then I've also got another video with my partner talking about an experience where she was with me when the OBE happened, and how we were able to verify the details again. And then I've also taken part in experiments with Rupert Sheldrake, to demonstrate psychic abilities, or psi abilities as they call it within the scientific framework. and also visited IONS in California, the Institute of Noetic Sciences, with Dean Radin, and took part in his micro PK experiment, which also had positive results. So I'm trying as much as possible to be involved in the science as much as I can, and I'm taking part in another study very soon with some researchers in Italy as well. So that's kind of really, I guess, my passion in one way, to see if we can gain some more objective evidence for these kinds of experiences as best we can.
What's your YouTube channel, Graham?
If people just search for Graham Nicholls, it'll come up.
Okay, awesome. Another thing too that I was hoping we could discuss, when you have these experiences and you say it's more of a sphere, like you're kind of a sphere traveling, do you see everything like you do now through your eyes, just in a more of a gray scale? Or like, for example, when you have an out of body experience and you travel, and let's say you want to go travel to Antarctica to see if there's actual pyramids there that are talked about on the internet forums or something like that. And I'm just kind of joking around here, but maybe there is. I mean, I don't know. There is possibilities. Would you see it? I mean, can you go to GPS coordinates 56.14.13, whatever, and then bang, you're actually seeing it like you would with your eyes?
If I wanted to do something like that, I would probably do it with a team of remote viewers. I also do remote viewing, and I have some people who I work with on that level. In my experience, this is my personal experience, the controllability of an out-of-body experience is much harder to work with than something like remote viewing. So, going to a particular location in a very controlled way is quite difficult to do. I think that a lot of authors, unfortunately, exaggerate that kind of thing, and but of course they never show any evidence that they can do those kinds of things. Whereas I do have witnesses sort of supporting my experiences. So I guess I think my opinion is that some people kind of have exaggerated the controllability of the experience. I think that really it is more of, you can steer the ship, but you can't completely. You have to go with the waves and the wind, if you like if you see what I mean. I'm trying to
Sure.
kind of give an analogy of how it would be. You have to sort of go with the nature of the experience, but you can. So if you might be in a particular location, you can control whether you go up or down or left or right, but to completely control the whole thing, to go to like map coordinates in that context, that's not something I've found very easy to do. I have on occasion had experiences more like that where it's been very controllable, but what I would say is experiences where the vision is at its peak, where the controllability is at its peak, all of those kinds of things are rarer. They tend to be experiences that are what I would call peak experiences. So, you might have maybe two or three of those in a year. So it's not like an everyday occurrence. The visual factor is actually something I'm also researching at the moment, because for a long time, both in near-death experience research and in out-of-body experience research, there's been the assumption that visual perception is exactly the same as physical perception or optical perception when we're having an out-of-body experience. And that doesn't really make a lot of sense logically, because, well, we don't have eyes. We know we don't have physical eyes with light receptors and all the rest of it. So it doesn't make a lot of sense that vision would be the same. So what I did is I went through many, many of my experiences, and I found that there are color characteristics. Often I would see in duotone or two-tone vision, and what I would find by that is that they seem to be paired in the same way that you would see with the visual light spectrum. So the visual light spectrum goes from one color into another. It kind of fades from one color into another, like blue transitions into green, for example. So within the out-of-body experience, you might see in this blue-green. You might remember when I described my first induced out-of-body experience, I described a blue-green energy. So blue-green also relates to scotopic vision, which basically means low light vision. when you're in a low light vision condition, like this is optically in terms of physical vision now, when you're in that kind of state, your vision shuts down into its blue-green spectrum. The cells of your eyes actually are only seeing in a much more limited framework. So one idea I have is that maybe the out of body experience vision is related to optical vision, but it's some kind of reconstruction or some kind of distortion of physical vision because the faculties, the lenses and all of the rest of it are not present within the out of body experience. So you get a kind of facsimile of the actual visual system. So that's another area that I'm looking into because I think the more we can understand how vision works, the better we'll be able to gain evidence for perception outside of the body.
Now, also, when you have these OBE experiences and there's other people that do it as well with you, I mean, can you communicate with them in that real time zone or whatever definition you want to put to it?
That's something that's very hard to do. I've done it on occasion, and some of the people I'm working with have had similar kinds of experiences. One man I was working with had an out of body experience where he met his young son, who was having his son was having his first out of body experience. So that was quite an amazing story. Basically, you know, the boy's first experience was to meet his father while out of body, and his wife, who was kind of a skeptic, was a witness to the son describing this. So she was quite blown away by the whole thing. And then, but I think what's more common is seeing you in some kind of form while you're out of body, but that person is consciously in body. So, for example, the common way that people see you will be as a kind of shadow. They'll see a sort of shadowy figure, or again, a kind of lime green kind of energy is also sometimes described. I've had two joint experiences of that. For example, while being physically conscious. So one where I was meditating with a close friend called Jian, and a sphere of green energy floated down in front of us around the size of a basketball, and we both saw it and sat there for, I remember it as around 10 minutes, something like that. I can't be sure of the time, but it was there for a long time. And then more recently, just a couple of years ago, I was with my girlfriend. We were laying on the bed, and we were in quite a heightened emotional state, not a negative one, a more positive one, heightened sort of emotional state. And it was almost like both of us, or one of us, projected out an energy form, and we both saw a humanoid torso floating above us in this kind of limeish green color, which is exactly the same kind of color that I saw with Jian many years before, meditating in my bedroom as a teenager. So I've had these experiences, and with her, I've also had some other experiences like that. But that gives you an illustration of how it's common to have shared experiences, maybe more in a sort of physical sense than it is within the OBE. But it does happen on occasion that you'll share the out of body experience, and then actually there can be quite profound experiences where you almost kind of meld together and you seem to share your consciousness for a moment, but they tend to be quite fleeting as well.
Also, with these experiences that you have you ever made contact with like different types of deities or entities? For example, like sylphs that are talked about or stuff like that?
Well, like I said earlier, it's very hard to say how objective those kind of things are. Um, I've I've got two, I guess, what you would call guides that I work with. So they would, I guess, be in the context of entities, but
What are they
I
like?
I keep a pinch of salt, if you like, by the bed to, like
Sure.
as a kind of as in, then I don't know whether they're not just a part of my self, my higher consciousness, or something like that. It's very hard to know
Sure.
how objective that kind of thing is. Um, well, um, one seems to be related to a kind of dynamic, creative kind of energy. Is more to do with a kind of actually sort of almost like a reptilian kind of consciousness, reptilian brain kind of level, whereas the other is more mammalian and more to do with like natural consciousness and human consciousness and things like that. So
What do you mean by
um,
reptilian?
I knew you were going to pick up on that.
The
um,
shapeshifter.
I, no, I just mean that it's not so emotionally focused. It feels more like the reptilian brain. All humans have a part of the brain that's reptilian. It's more primordial. It's more kind of from our basic level of evolution. So I tend to view it in that kind of context. That's how it kind of feels, if you like. It's hard really to describe. I mean, it works on many different levels, and I also
It's kind of
see
like
these.
primal, I
Yeah,
guess.
I see these two things as interlinked. Essentially, I also see um, they they kind of. I mean, I describe them more. If people are interested, they can read my first book, Avenues of the Human Spirit, and in there's a chapter called Shame. The more reptilian consciousness is called Shah, and the more mammalian one is called May, and I kind of join them together as Shame because I find that they're almost like yin and yang, if you like, but not but they're not opposites. It's more complicated than that. But yeah, I haven't really got time to kind of explain it all in detail, but that they would be the main sort of consciousnesses, if you like, that I work with, and that maybe have led to a growth of much more positive life values and things like that. Becoming vegan, focusing more on positive change in society and things like that.
Have you ever been able to contact a deceased relative?
Um, I've had various afterlife kind of experiences. I wouldn't say contact a deceased relative, but I've experienced afterlife levels quite frequently in my experiences, especially the more Summerland type environments, which is the term they use in Native American, pagan, quite a few different. Emanuel Swedenborg, for example, if you're familiar with him, he also talked about the Summerland levels. He was a Swedish scientist who later started having out of body experiences, basically, although the term didn't exist then. Even astral projection didn't really exist as a concept to him. So but he traveled into heaven as he saw it in his kind of religious context and had many experiences like that. So he called these levels the Summerlands because they basically look like a very beautiful, translucent kind of Earth-like environment with beautiful nature and animals and that kind of thing. And I've experienced lots of levels like that. Actually, on an evidential level, I also had a shared death experience, which is where you experience the afterlife or the death, the early stages of the death experience with someone else. In my out of body experience, I went to a misty, cloudy kind of environment, and I saw about 140 people who all seemed confused, slightly unaware of what was happening to them, trying to work out what was going on. They were all interacting in a group to some degree, but also not. So they were aware of each other, but they were also very contained within their own thoughts. That's what I'm meaning. And there seemed to be images and glimpses of like their lives were coming from them. It's like I was seeing a glimpse here and there of a moment in each person's life, and it seemed to be a non-English speaking culture. It seemed to be maybe somewhere more like Europe, but it was very hard to know exactly where it was. but I got all these images of what had happened, and I got the impression that they died quickly in some kind of accident. And then after the out of body experience, this was in 1995. After the out of body, sorry, 96. After the out of body experience, I went into the living room, and I think it was my father was watching the television or listening to the radio, and there was the news came that that there'd been a crash in Norway, and that 140 people had died in this crash. So that seemed to be a complete verification of the out of body experience that I'd had on that other level, but confirmed on this level. So that was very powerful in the sense that I guess when we have experiences on that other level, the afterlife level, it's very, very hard to get any kind of objective evidence from that for whether what you experienced was real. But what's great about that particular experience was I was then able to find that there was some evidence that it really did happen and that those events really happened. And interestingly, as well, many years later, more recently, just a year and a half ago, I had an experience where I went to the Arctic Ocean. There's a whole article about this on my website, grahamnichols.com, if people want to read this. But I went to um, my Norwegian pronunciation is not good. I'm not sure how to say this, but an island called Svalbard, um, where there was this crash. It's basically where the seed bank is in in uh, in an island north of Norway. And this island has the seed bank. It's up in the Arctic. I was able to see the seed bank, which I again didn't know about prior to the experience. And then I came across to the right, and I saw a boot-like island, which looked almost like Italy but in reverse. So I memorized that as a way to work out where I was because I knew I was in the Arctic, but I didn't know exactly where. So this boot-like shape was a way that I could try and trace where I'd been. And then I went down from there into the north of Finland, and which is just above where I physically live now. So I also encountered a Sami man, which is the traditional kind of folk culture of northern Finland. So that was quite a profound experience, and it seemed to be linked with the plane crash in some way because the two had happened in the same location. So I don't know why I've been drawn to that place on multiple occasions, but I think it's something that I'm going to be looking into.
What is it like for you after you have these experiences? I mean, does it mess with your head a little bit? Does it affect you throughout the day?
Oh, of course, it affects me for a long time. I think some of the experiences have affected me for my life, really. I think the out of body experiences have changed me fundamentally. They've made me more peaceful, more happy, more healthy, um, more open minded, and more interested in exploring what's out there and exploring the world and learning more and things like that. And also more compassionate in a direct sense as well. So I think they've had a profound impact on me. But when an experience like that happens, it's exciting on so many levels because it just opens me up and makes me think. What might it's almost like being a detective or something, trying to find out and uncover what the truth is about your experiences and about the nature of this enigmatic experience, these out of body experiences. I just want to understand as much as I can about them because they've been the most fascinating and amazing thing in terms of what we can experience in our lives. So I'm very interested to find out and to learn as much as I possibly can and really step outside the box and outside the preconceptions and see where it leads.
There's a movie and a TV series called Minority Report. Have you seen it?
Well, I know Philip K. Dick, who wrote the story. I mean, I know of his work, and I saw the film. I haven't seen the TV series.
with the kind of abilities that you have and you help other people obtain and nourish, I think of the precogs in the series where the government basically, kidnaps them at birth and, programs them and teaches them how to basically be these people that can see the future. And then if there's something bad that's going to happen, they'll stop it before it happens. Have you ever had any strange activities like where you feel like maybe there's Men in Black type people, not Men in Black, but similar to that? They're kind of checking you out, government, spook type individuals, and maybe want to harness your abilities or tap into some of those things?
In short, no. uh, um, no, I can't think of anything on that level. I think with these kinds of things, though, as we know with the remote viewing program, I'm sure many of your listeners will be familiar with remote viewing and the remote viewing program.
Oh yeah.
I I think I think the thing with remote viewing, as with all psychic abilities, when we get it into a scientific context and we really examine it, we know that there's a lot of accurate information. It can be really, really phenomenal how accurate these experiences, OBEs, remote viewing, precognition, micro PK, all this kind of stuff. It's completely amazing. But at the same time, I think we're still at the point that we're dealing with a kind of a scratchy signal, if you like. Michael Persinger, the Canadian researcher, described it in that way. He did a great lecture called "No More Secrets," which came to mind when you were saying that, because his idea is that if we develop remote viewing to a high enough level, there will be no more secrets. Every one of us will have access to any piece of information anywhere in the world. But the problem is we need to enhance the abilities. This is why we need the technology, because at the moment, no one, they can make all the claims they want, but no one in the world can do this stuff 100%. Everyone is, working within a small peak experience type framework where sometimes you have those amazing hits and other times it just, you just can't function on a psychical level at all, or on an OBE level, or whatever level it might be. So what we need to do is we need to refine and understand how to optimize these experiences and how to tell when we're in the peak experiences or when the peak experiences are likely to happen, all these kinds of things. So Michael Persinger is doing all this research with his Corin helmet, which is basically uses solenoids, magnetic pads, basically across the temporal lobes, which helps to enhance and bring about altered states. He has a particular configuration of these solenoids over the skull that he calls the octopus configuration. Now, that particular configuration is designed to enhance psychic abilities, and so far, the work he's done does seem to show that there is an enhancement. So he can take an undergraduate student, put them in the Corin helmet, put it in this particular configuration, and they'll start to have more accurate perceptions. So that's the kind of research that we need. We really need to push things forward, because then if we could do that, that's when psychic abilities will really have potential in terms of what we could see and what we could find out. But on a more grassroots level, we can all start to look for within our own experiences. If we practice remote viewing or we practice out of body experiences, when we do have these experiences, like for example the Soho bombing experience I described earlier, or I had another precognitive OBE of the 7/7 bombings that happened in 2005 in London as well. Both of those experiences had this blue-grey or blue-green sort of energy quality about them. So that's a way that I can now recognize if I have an experience like that, which I've only had 3 in my life. But if I have another experience like that, then I know that that experience is highly likely to be valid or useful in a precognitive sense. when I have this sort of green yellow type experience, which is more like everything is translucent and full of light and really, really vivid, when I have those kinds of experiences, I know that the experience will also probably be accurate. So when I had the experience in Tallinn recently that my partner verified, um, I knew before I left the house that this was probably an accurate experience. So we wrote all of the information down before I left the house, and then we went out with the camera, took pictures to confirm what I'd actually seen in the out of body experience. So when those kinds of experiences happen, when there's those peak kind of experiences, that's when we get an idea that we might be having an accurate or very, very precise experience. So I think to do things in more of a intelligence agency kind of context, I think that's the next level. I mean, who knows? Maybe they're already leagues ahead of me in developing those kinds of things, but as you know, I don't know. But
I,
I think, go on.
Oh, I apologize for interrupting. I'm just thinking of Dr. Courtney Brown, the Farsight Institute. We've spoken with Daz Smith, Dick Algeier, and
Sure.
there's some incredible remote viewers. One thing that I always hear from Courtney, he makes it very clear in every show that he goes on that remote viewing, if there's a target that's made for remote viewing, the person that's actually viewing the target can have absolutely no idea what they're going to be looking at, because if they do, he says that 99% of the time the imagination just creates it, and it screws up the remote viewing. However, his type of applications, their stuff is straight military derived applications, and it's not an out of body type experience. But it seems like when I've interviewed Daz and Dick before, and they get into when they remote viewed Hitler's mind and other planets and stuff like that, they actually talk about how not only do they see it, they feel it, they smell what's there, they sense. So the whole aspect of these different sensory perceptions. And you're talking about this helmet. First of all, I want one. Where do I get one? Will he sell me one?
There is actually a commercial version called the Shakti coil. I'm advertising someone else's product now.
I gotta have one of those.
You can actually buy one, so yeah. I'm not sure how much they cost, but you can get. It's not as advanced as the one that he uses in his research, but they do exist. But on what you were saying about the remote viewing, like I say, I have a team of people who I do remote viewing with, and I've spoken at the International Remote Viewing Conference in Las Vegas as well, and things like that. So it's an area that I'm also very interested in, and I think that remote viewing and out of body experiences are on a continuum. Obviously, out of body experiences are my main passion, but I think that remote viewing is a very applicable tool. It's a way to gain a greater level of controllability. But yes, you mentioned, Courtney Brown said, if you're aware of the target, then that's going to reduce your accuracy by quite a significant amount, which goes back to what I was saying at the beginning as well about if you have preconceptions with the out of body experience, that can then filter in and affect your out of body experience. So I think it's very important to have this kind of clarity of mind as much as possible, meditation and things like that. Joe McMoneagle, for example, I know practices a kind of cool down period, as he calls it, with his remote viewing. So he will get the mind to a kind of still state before he actually goes into doing any remote viewing. With my out of body experience work, it's a separate practice and also a related practice, but I do Zazen, which is basically Zen meditation. So I focus on this idea of getting to a still mind. So if you have this calmness and stillness within your overall practice, then you don't emotionally overreact when you have the experience, so you're able to gain more control. You develop more clarity of mind, which actually seems to have a knock-on effect of clarity of vision. There's a whole range of factors that the actual meditation can be used to enhance the other psychical approaches that you might use. So I think, all of this is interrelated. They're all on a kind of continuum, really. And I think that remote viewing is where you have awareness of two places at the same time. Essentially, that's kind of how you're working, and you're structuring that within a protocol, which helps for accuracy of information. Whereas an out of body experience, you go so deep to the point that you lose awareness of the physical body, and you have a completely immersive, completely separate experience. So they're kind of, if you had a continuum of full body awareness, and at the other end of the spectrum, out of body awareness, remote viewing would probably be in the middle between the two.
Yeah, I definitely like the way you put that. The different influences that can be caused via out of body experiences. Let's get into some Jedi Knight stuff here for a minute. The Force is strong with this one. Is it a possibility to influence somebody's way of thought or affect them by out of body experiences?
Uh, it's not something I've particularly attempted, but I would imagine that the person will be aware of your presence, maybe even only on an unconscious level. It seems often people do seem to react in some way. They're not aware of why they're reacting or what they're reacting to, but there is, especially in their if they're in a relaxed and receptive state, when you're near them in the out of body experience, they're more likely to show some sign that, at least on an unconscious level, that they're aware of your presence. Um, Many people have attempted to use out of body experiences for healing purposes. So, trying to send energy and help that person while they're having an OBE. So there are areas that seem to suggest that's the case. But again, I think it would be something you'd have to do some actual research on. I think it would be quite interesting research to do, actually.
Sure, yeah. And the different stuff you've got in your kit, in your Navigator series, you talk about some different sounds and stuff like that that help emphasize these abilities. Is it almost binary beats type stuff or?
No, I developed my technology, which is infraliminal sound. I developed it because I didn't find binaural beats effective. That was really the bottom line. They didn't seem to have much effect for me. So we started in the late 90s, about 98. If people look for my name plus the word epicene, they'll find one of my first structures, which was a large steel structure with a central platform that the person was suspended in, and then there was hypnotic induction played over audio and an early form of the infraliminal sound, which so the whole structure was designed to help facilitate an out of body experience. And the more you can use those kinds of immersive technologies, the more you can increase the chance someone will have an OBE by a small amount. But the thing is, if you increase their chances, say by 5%, by 10%, by using these kinds of things, when you bring them all together, um, the things that I describe in the course and in Navigating the Out of Body Experience, the book, just gives this clearer avenue towards having the experience, because you've given yourself this incremental increase in chance that you'll have an experience, even if it's only 5%. But if you bring in six things that are 5%, then you've got a 30% increase. It's
Sure.
um, so that's kind of another of the approaches that I take with bringing in all these small kind of things to help. But the infraliminal technology, I'm very proud of it. It took many years to develop, and it's based upon inducing the vibrational state, and it seems to be effective in 80, 90+% of people. And I can genuinely make that claim that it works in the vast majority of people, that they'll achieve the vibrational state. So it's and the vibrational state, as most people know, is the first stage of getting to the out of body experience.
And also, you do this virtual reality stuff combined with the sounds. And I'm thinking of that new VR Oculus and all the new headsets that you can pick up now. There's even one for like $100 that connects to your Samsung phone. Are you going to use that type of technology also to help induce these?
I'm working on some ideas to work in that kind of way as well. Yeah, the virtual reality I did, the largest one was at the Science Museum in 2004. It was a huge structure. I'm not even sure, maybe 40 meters square, with a huge curving screen, fully immersive surround sound, but one person at a time. So imagine that scale with just you on your own. Um, so that had a very big emotional and powerful impact as well. And the thing about a lot of these technologies is they're not so much designed to give you an experience in that moment. Obviously, even if you were wearing the headset, this didn't use a headset, the one at the Science Museum. You just had glasses like you would wear in a 3D movie. Um, but but this was way ahead. You know, this was 2004. We were already using that kind of technology, and it was interactive as well. So you know, probably no, at least 5 years ahead of its time. Um, but yeah, so we basically, it was almost like programming. It was using these kind of hypnotic approaches and neurolinguistic programming type technologies to put that idea across, which is essentially what a lot of the other technology uses as well. So the idea is that it programs you essentially towards the out of body experience. So then when you go home that night, you have an experience sort of after you've worked with it. So the more you work with it, the more you kind of program yourself essentially.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I definitely can't wait to pick up this course at navigatorcourse.com. This is going to be a lot of fun. Before we close out tonight, Graham, is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners or any new projects you have on the horizon?
I think we've covered pretty much everything really. If they want to keep up with what I'm doing, maybe just follow me on Facebook. They can add me as a friend or go to my like page, which is just Graham Nicholls. If you do a search, you'll find me. Then there's also they can join my mailing list on grahamnichols.com. There's a little box on the right of the screen. You can put your email in there, and then you'll get a newsletter. So when there's a new live course, I should mention with the Navigator course, you can get the pre-recorded download or streaming version of it. So that's instant access. But there's actually a live course that runs every sort of month or so, and the next one is on May the 8th. So just a month and a bit away. So if people want to sign up for the live course where you can interact and all of that, then that's the option as well.
Well, this has been great. Certainly appreciate you coming on here with us and spending time out of your day. Really looking forward to getting this new material. And hey, folks, check him out, navigatorcourse.com. Pick up the set, become a mental Jedi, have the opportunity to travel time and space within your own mind. I mean, just an amazing opportunity. Doesn't get any better than that. And also, grahamnichols.com. Graham, thanks again. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show. Have a fantastic evening.
Thank you.